Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Mic check. Test 1 2. Testing the podium microphones. Test 1 2. Can I get a thumbs up when we're good to go? Test 1 2. Test. Test. Can we get a little more in the house? Test. Mic check. 1 2. Test. Testing the podium microphone. Good to go? In the back? Thumbs up. Test. Are you good to go? Yes? Test 1 2. Mic check. 1 2. Testing the podium microphone. Test 1 2. A little more. Test 1 2. Mic check. 1 2. Testing the podium microphone. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. I think you need to come down a little. Test 1 2. Testing. Test. Thank you.
please welcome U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Catherine Tai.
All right. It's great to be here with all of you. Good afternoon. I wanted to, on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration, underscore how important our engagement with tribal and indigenous communities is, especially as we continue to shape more inclusive and fairer trade policies. As the United States Trade Representative, it is important to note for all of you how often I reflect on the fact that a people of traders at the water's edge was the meaning of the name of the original inhabitants of the land on which we are assembled for today's summit. Our nation's story on trade begins with all of you and your communities. Your ancestors were our first traders. From pelts to food and so much more, trade among tribes was vibrant and flourishing here well before the arrival of European colonizers. It was a sustaining, driving way of life. This legacy is particularly significant for our approach to U.S. trade policy under President Biden and Vice President Harris. Now, for the first time in our agency's history, we at USTR are actively and intentionally working to ensure that the dignity, priorities, and well-being of the world's first and original traders are reflected as we craft a news story here on trade and investment policy. We know that our economy is more than just numbers, even though oftentimes it feels like when we talk about our economy, it's just a bunch of numbers. Our economy is actually made up of people, and that is why we need to make sure that our economy works for our people. Not only for those that know the ins and outs of trade policy making and Washington, D.C., but especially for those that have been traditionally not heard or seen. And this is at the heart of how we are building our economy, as the president says, from the middle out and from the bottom up, and ensuring that more people across our society get their fair share of the economic pie that we are all making. I am proud to say that the president's trade policy agenda and annual report now include unprecedented objectives and updates on engaging with tribal nations, tribal colleges and universities, Native and Indigenous community-based organizations, academia, entrepreneurs, and enterprises. Not only must you claim your rightful seat at the table, your voices must help shape our work. And that is why at my agency, USTR, we have made it a priority to hear directly from tribal nations, to meet you where you are, to hear your concerns, and to learn from you. One of the first actions that I took after being confirmed as U.S. Trade Representative was to host tribal consultations with tribal leaders in what many believe were the first ever in USTR's 60-year history. They are now an annual standard. And this is really important because our approach to trade is grounded in equity, fairness, and respect. If done right, trade can be a force for good to empower working families and underserved communities. In our tribal consultation meetings and discussions, we have learned so much from you. We are reminded of the importance of acknowledging and resurrecting traditional trade practices and economies and the challenges of operating in today's global economy. So our way of honoring this rich history is to put you front and center of our trade policy making. We sought and appointed Indigenous experts to serve as cleared advisors on our trade advisory committees. This is a first step to better inform our approach when we engage with other economies, including in the Indo-Pacific, the Western Hemisphere, and Africa. As a hallmark moment for our host year for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, meetings in San Francisco last month, I was deeply honored to convene the first ever minister-level dialogue with Indigenous leaders. And I was very honored that Chief Malerba, who's sitting in the front row here, was a part of that convening and could speak directly to my trade minister counterparts from Asia. I also want to note that the minister statement from APEC this year includes specific mentions of Indigenous peoples as an important part of realizing equitable economic growth, which it turns out isn't just a goal for us, but is a goal of other countries and economies as well. We are also continuing to work with the U.S. International Trade Commission to better understand how trade policies and trade might impact our tribal communities and Native and Indigenous workers. The USITC's investigation revealed, first of all, that we need better and more disaggregated data and research. So we are partnering with our interagency colleagues across the administration to change that and to improve that. Influenced by your voices, USTR is also working with colleagues across the U.S. government to explore how trade tools and trade rules may better address issues like misappropriation of Indigenous goods and capacity building for Native entrepreneurs and workers. I would also like to note that the United States greatly appreciates the work that is happening among partners of the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement, or the IPETCA. Thanks to your guidance to us at USTR, the United States announced that we are actively and eagerly exploring becoming an observer to that agreement. Our entire administration is fully committed to using trade as a force for good for Indigenous workers everywhere. And just as Native heritage and culture are foundational to our nation's identity and fabric, we are committed to lifting up Native voices as foundational pillars of our work going forward. It is an honor to be here with you today. I look forward to getting to know more and more of you and to continuing to build our work together. Thank you so much for your partnership.
Please welcome to the stage Director of the Office of Personnel Management, Kira Nahuja, and Department of Veterans Affairs Deputy Assistant Secretary, Zanetta Adams.
How's everyone doing? I know we're coming right before the prime time, so make sure to get out of your way really quickly. It's very wonderful to be here. As the voice of God mentioned, I'm Kira Nahuja. I am the Director of the Office of Personnel Management. So you have to think about the Office of Personnel Management and OPM is like the human resources wing for the federal government, which happens to be the largest employer in this country. Our mission is to recruit, retain, and honor the federal workforce, and to be a model employer, an example for employers across the country. We are here today because of our commitment to tribal nations and ensuring your voice in federal decision-making. So I'm not going to be talking necessarily about federal jobs, though I'm happy to do that at some other point. I'm going to talk about another role that we have here at OPM, which is really facilitating an important effort that is underway within the federal government. And that is tribal consultation. I am speaking to those who know so much more than I do, and that is the fact that tribal consultation is a cornerstone of honoring our relationship and upholding sovereignty and self-determination. We know that effective consultation requires genuine engagement, continuous dialogue, and in utilizing established best practices. So I think what has been, unfortunately, the environment of late is that consultation has been left to a few agencies to do very well. and not for all of us to really understand our role and our responsibility. All agencies must be equipped to lead effective consultation. And as you know, last year, the President signed a memorandum establishing uniform standards for tribal consultation and directed my agency and Department of Interior to help build a tribal consultation training for all 2.2 million federal employees. Just a small group of people, that's all. So, I'm pleased to announce some important steps that we're making forward in this effort that I want to share with you today. So the Office of Personnel Management, along with the financial support of the Department of Veteran Affairs, and Zanetta is here with me today, I want to take a point of privilege that her boss, Secretary McDonough, gave me a personal call about this a couple of weeks ago about his level of commitment, and also the financial and significant substantive support from the Department of Interior. We are building a consultation training module for all federal employees that will focus on increasing understanding of tribal governments, best practices for consultation informed by tribes, and the legal requirements for consultation. So as a part of this effort, OPM led a formal consultation with Interior to hear recommendations on how to improve consultation government-wide and better understand issues that tribes are experiencing. Here's a couple of things that we heard from you all. We learned that for too many tribal communities, consultation is simply what you feel from us is checking the box. And at the same time, we learned that tribes are receiving a lot of requests for consultation, in part because of the President and Cabinet's commitment to tribal nations, and that requires so much of your time and expertise. So through this formal consultation on consultation, we determined that we must make consultation more efficient, effective, and less burdensome for tribes and federal agencies. In addition to tribal consultation, we know that it is equally important that the federal government, as a part of our unique trust responsibilities, understands and respects tribal, treaty, and reserved rights. In the consultation on developing this training, lack of understanding these treaty rights was the biggest issue the tribal leaders raised. That is why, alongside the consultation module, there will be a treaty and reserve rights module as well that will ensure that federal employees are made aware of treaty rights, taught how to interpret and navigate them, and that they follow a set of best practices previously put together by the White House Council on Native American Affairs. So I am actually excited to show a short preview of what this new course is going to look like, but in just a few minutes, because I am really looking forward to my colleague, Zanetta Adams, to speak with you for a few minutes. And I'll bring her up, but let me thank you for your partnership, your candor, and your feedback, and your commitment to productive and mutually beneficial relationship between the federal government and tribal nations. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Ahuja, and thank you, tribal leaders, for your commitment to ensuring that members of your tribe's voices are heard. Secretary McDonough and the entire VA are committed to ensuring that Native veterans are connected to their earned benefits in a way that works for them. And we want to partner with you on the best ways to do that. The $250,000 commitment is just one of the many ways that we will continue to show up for our Native veterans. Honoring the sovereignty of tribal nations is paramount, and this new training will help fortify federal agencies' ability to consistently enter into tribal consultation with tribal nations in accordance with the presidential memorandum that was signed, as Director Ahuja mentioned, January 2021. Thank you again for the opportunity to serve veterans in a meaningful way, and thank you for your service and your continued service. I know that tribal veterans serve at a large rate, and we want to make sure that we're here to serve you. So with that said, let's cue the video.
Cue up the video.
Thank you.
Wherever it is.
Okay, we're going to hold the video.
We're going to hold the video. I think there's some important other stuff happening. See ya.
Please welcome Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, Brian Newland.
All right. Ani Bujun and away Maganaduk. Minogijip. Good afternoon, tribal leaders and friends from all across Indian country. You've heard a lot this morning about the amazing progress we're seeing thanks to President Biden's leadership. Secretary Holland said it earlier, and we've said it often, but it's worth saying again. Under President Biden, we've made unprecedented investments in Indian country of $45 billion. From day one, President Biden has acted for us. He's put tribal sovereignty, self-determination, and indigenous prosperity at the front of his agenda, and I couldn't be more inspired or proud of his leadership. The steps we've taken over the past 3 years will lay the foundation for the future to ensure that every Native person has the right to live safe, healthy, and fulfilling lives together as tribal people in their tribal homeland. So it's my honor to introduce someone who leads with the ideals that this era demands, someone who's never stopped pushing for the dreams and ambitions of Indigenous people, the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Please have a seat. And thanks for all the tribal leaders here. I want to say how much I appreciate your efforts of being here. You know, we're grateful you made the journey to have, we have an important conversation to have about things that matter most to your people. That's why we're here. It's a simple proposition. When I became president, I promised my administration would prioritize respect for tribal sovereignty and self-determination. Otherwise, Danny Inouye would come down from heaven and beat me up. I was raised by Danny Inouye. You think I'm joking? I remember once I said, all those Indian nations. She said, no, nations, Joe, nations, nations. And that was 50 years ago. You know, that we usher in a new era of relationship between our government and nation-to-nation relationships. We've made progress, but we know indigenous communities still live in the shadows of the failed policies of the past. That's why I committed to working with you to write a new and better chapter in American history for Indian nations. To honor the solemn promise the United States made to tribal nations to fulfill our federal trust and treaty obligations and to work together to rebuild tribal economies and institutions. To make this new era, well, you should be clapping. This is the first time this has happened. Come on, guys. You may not be proud of all this, but I'm really proud of it. Make this new era of self-determination a reality. On my watch, the federal government has made record investments in tribal nations. There's more to do. The American Rescue Plan, the largest direct federal investment in tribal nations ever. We helped vaccinate tribal communities. We got the economy going again. And the bipartisan infrastructure, the single biggest investment in tribal roads, bridges, water, high-speed internet, electricity, integration, environmental cleanup, and so much more, because you deserve it. It's long overdue. The Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in fighting climate change ever, anywhere in the history of the world, and helping tribal communities to lead in the transition to clean energy and ease the impact of droughts and wildfires and rising sea levels that threaten native lives and precious homelands. You know, at the same time, my administration last year secured the first ever advanced funding for Indian health services. $5.1 billion locked in before budget negotiations so hospitals could plan ahead, order supplies, hire doctors, knowing the money would be there. And we're going to keep fighting to make sure that funding is a mandatory part of the federal budget, so tribes can count on it year in and year out. Folks, these transformational investments are going to help tribes, but they help all Americans, all Americans. We know the federal dollars are vital to your communities in order to be able to thrive. We know you know best how to invest them, not us. You know. You know what your communities need, and that's what self-determination means. But today, there are still too many hoops to jump through, too many strings attached, and too many inefficiencies in the process. For example, a small tribe may qualify for federal funding, but they can't afford to hire an extra staff needed to complete all the paperwork. Or a tribal council may secure a grant, but can't collect it without raising enough cash to meet the federal matching requirements. Or a remote Alaskan village may receive funds without roads or internet and has to charter a plane or every quarter just to be required to be in compliance with the report. Folks, we can do a hell of a lot better than that. A hell of a lot better than that. And we're going to. That's why today I'm signing an executive order to reform the federal funding system for tribes, cutting that red tape so you can deliver for your community faster and better. And here's what that order does. It requires federal agencies to streamline grant applications, to co-manage federal programs, to eliminate heavy-handed reporting requirements that gives tribes more autonomy to make your own decisions, Not to mention, it's more efficient. We know this approach works because we're doing it in some programs already, and we've been doing it for some programs for nearly 50 years. Take the Indian Health Service. More than half its budget now goes directly to tribes to run their own clinics and hospitals rather than relying on federal facilities. That's a source of local pride, deliver quality care tailored directly for each community because communities are different. Today's executive order also creates an online clearinghouse, a one-stop shop where tribal governments can more easily search for grants and all in one place. And that to me, by the way, not only tribes, but every state's asking for the same thing. And the order also task the Office of Management and Budget and my Domestic Policy Council with identifying areas where our funding falls short and ways to meet these needs going forward. Folks, separately, we're also streamlining the Buy Indian Act so federal agencies get more goals and services, goods and services from Native-owned businesses. Native-owned businesses. This year, for example, the Indian Affairs Bureau awarded 75% of its budget to Native-owned enterprises, up from about half that in 2021. Together, these steps are going to help grow tribal economies and reduce the hoops they have to jump through to get the funding they deserve. It's all part of my vision for a new era of respect. Respect for you as leaders, respect for tribal sovereignty, respect for the nation's fundamental right to build a future and own on your own terms, not anyone else's terms. From day one, I've worked to include Indigenous voices at the table in all we do. I've appointed Native Americans to lead across the federal government. Not only Secretary Holland, America's first Indigenous Cabinet Secretary, and I can say without exaggeration, she's doing one hell of a job. One hell of a job. But scores of other Native Americans in key roles across the administration. I've been proud to reestablish the White House Council on Native American Affairs to help coordinate that policy as well. And I'm proud to relaunch this annual summit after years of neglect by my predecessors. I was proud to take historic steps to improve consultation process between federal agencies and tribal nations. Working together, we also reauthorized the Violence Against Women Act, which I wrote as a U.S. Senator, expanding tribes' sovereign jurisdiction, their sovereign jurisdiction. And I directed federal agencies to work with you to address the missing and murdered Indigenous people. At the same time, preserving important and ancestral tribal lands. I restored protections for my predecessor, gutted by my predecessor, at 3 national monuments. Grand Staircase and Bears Ears. And by the way, you know how that happened? I was in a plane, and a little girl came up to me, she said, "Mr. President, can you take care of Bears Ears?" And I thought she said, "Can I take care of her ears?" And I said, "What, honey?" She said, "Bears Ears, it's really important." And guess what? She was dead right, and we did take care of it. The Northeast Canyons and Seamount and the coast of New England I used my authority under the Antiquities Act to designate new national monuments as well, including Castor Range in Texas, Camp Hale in Colorado, Spirit Mountain in Nevada, ancestral footprints in the Grand Canyon, which, by the way, I enjoyed doing that at the last one. Anyway, it got some attention from people who didn't agree with me. But anyway, meanwhile, my Department of Agriculture and Interior have signed more than 200 agreements to strengthen co-stewardship of federal lands, recognizing the value of tribal knowledge. And today, we're publishing the Best Practices Guide to help federal agencies work with tribes to protect sacred sites in all these areas. Folks, at the same time, we're helping to preserve cultural heritage like tribal languages and sports. sports like lacrosse. Joining us today are members of the Six Nation Confederacy, by the way, where are you guys? Stand up. Come on. Which invented lacrosse nearly 1,000 years ago. The game brought tribes together, a force for peace, friendship, and healing. The Six Nation players are still among the very best in the world. And as a point of personal privilege, I know about this because I went to Syracuse University, long the home of a powerhouse lacrosse program. And I might add, my daughter was a first-rate lacrosse player in high school, and my niece was an All-American lacrosse player at Harvard. So we have a little knowledge of lacrosse in our family. I wanted to play lacrosse, but you had to choose between lacrosse and football. You couldn't play both in the same season. And since I was a powerful 6'1", 158-pound flanker back, I was the runner-up of state scoring championship. Don't laugh, man. As they say in football, I got soft hands. Catch a lot. This fall, it was announced that lacrosse will once again be an official Olympic sport. And the Six Nations team asked to compete under its own tribal flag. And today, I'm announcing my support for that request. Their ancestors invented the game. They perfected it for a millennia. Their circumstances are unique, and they should be granted an exception to field their own team at the Olympics. Let me close with this. It's hard work to heal the wrongs of the past and change the course and move forward. But the actions we're taking today are key steps into that new era of tribal sovereignty and self-determination. A new era grounded in dignity and respect that recognizes your fundamental rights to govern and grow on your own terms. That's what this summit is all about. That's what this summit is all about. So I want to thank you all for being here, allowing me to be with you, and I look forward to continuing our work together. Now it's my honor to sign the executive order to do all the things I just said. So thank you, thank you, thank you. The tradition is when you sign an executive order, you give one of these pens to the person responsible for it. You're all going to get a pen. I only have one. But I promise you're all going to get one. Executive order reforming federal funding and support for tribal nations to better embrace our trust responsibilities, promote the next era of tribal self-determination. There you go.